Heifetz moved in the late 30s to California. Why did he move from New York? After all, artistically, it doesn't make much sense to move away from New York. And indeed, all the other big soloists, they all congregated in and around New York.
Heifetz never really fit in with the East Coast highbrow circles. Heifetz loved to sail. Heifetz loved the sun. I think part of the move to California was just getting ready for a period of his life where he would be able to relax and do some of the things that for the bulk of his life he really had not been able to do.
He had this kind of Hollywood period. He even had a mustache, and I don't know, maybe he was trying to look like Clark Gable or something like that.
When I got to know him a little bit better, I visited Hollywood, and he lived in Beverly Hills. I discovered something. He had a wonderful sense of humor, and he just wanted to appear distant and cold. But I think he was not.
He had a lot of idiosyncrasies. Fact of the matter is, I only have known a handful of people who called him Jascha. And that was usually very, very old friends, like back from Russia. Closest one could get was Mr. H. Now, that was a great step forward. His pianist, Brooks Smith, he called him Mr. Heifetz.
There was on one occasion I took Mr. Heifetz to a dentist, and he was ushered into the examining room, sat in the chair, and the dentist came in saying, "Well, Jascha, how are you?" And Mr. Heifetz turned to the dentist and said, "Do I know you?" and got up and walked out.
You know, as a matter of fact, whenever he traveled, he never traveled under the name Heifetz. He traveled under the name of Jim Hoyl, J.H. All his luggage, all of his goods had initials J.H., so he had traveled in the name of Jim Hoyl. He wanted no publicity, wanted no one to come up and say hello, wanted no one to ask for his autograph.
He wrote some popular songs, but they weren't composed under the name Jascha Heifetz. They were composed under the name J.H., Jim Hoyl.
When you make love to me, don't make believe. Don't give your lips to me and laugh up your sleeve. You're like an April day.
In the 1960s, Heifetz was very concerned about smog. So he got the idea of converting his Volvo into an electric car.
My electric car was the first passenger car like it on this coast. It took me about 2 years of serious planning. I wanted all the publicity I could possibly get. The car was on TV, it was shown to scientists, it was all over the place. My contribution to fight the smog, so we can breathe the air that I think we are entitled to.
He was a man of routine. He did most of the time the same thing every day according to what he thought he ought to be doing to accomplish something. Basically, because of the view that he was able to see from his studio, that would sort of maybe give him a sense of peace and tranquility, because he was enjoying his solitude when he would go in there in the morning. Nobody was allowed there. There was a part of the day when he just needed to be by himself. That's why most of the time his secretaries could not come into the studio until, shall I say the word summoned?
He had a bicycle horn, the squeeze, rubber squeeze thing that honk, honk, honk. Well, if I was in the office and he was in his studio, he would call for me with that bicycle horn.
It would always go in a similar way. I would call him up on a Thursday afternoon. The phone would ring, and I believe his secretary answered the phone. And she said, Mr. Heifetz's office. I said, is Mr. Heifetz available? And she says, I'm sorry, he is not. Can I leave a message? And then the next day, I would get a phone call. And the phone would ring, and I would say, hello. Then the person on the other line would say, hello. And I would say, hello. And the person would say, hello. And wouldn't say who it is. But then after this third hello, I said, oh, Mr. Heifetz, how are you? And he said, I'm fine, how are you? He would never say, this is Mr. Heifetz calling. He would just say, hello, 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 hello. And then I was supposed to recognize the voice, which I did.
And the other thing he'd do is pick up the phone and do a very Chinese dialect, say, this is a Chinese laundry.
Well, they called me. He sometimes would change his name, like, hello, who is speaking? You want? No, Mr. Heifetz not here. Would you leave a message, you know? I know they're telling, there are so many stories about him, this and that and that.
Mr. Heifetz never allowed anyone to dust anything in his studio. Nothing was to be moved from its place. But then, one day, I discovered all of these unfinished transcriptions. I managed to get the courage to ask Mr. Heifetz what these incomplete manuscripts were doing there. And he said, it's none of your business. Whatever I decide not to do or do, that's my business. A few days later, he called me into the studio and asked me to look at his manuscripts. One of them, the first he ever wrote, was from 1923. He was in Mexico City, preparing to give a concert, and realized that he didn't have anything by a Mexican composer on the program. By chance, that evening, he was at a cafe and heard a local musician singing this popular song called Estrellita, My Little Star. He loved it so much, he wrote it on his napkin, went back to the hotel, and that night wrote this arrangement for violin and piano. It became one of his favorite encores. He met George Gershwin socially. They really liked and admired each other. Gershwin never wrote anything for the violin, but Mr. Heifetz wanted to play his music, so he made his own transcriptions.
It ain't necessarily so, by Gershwin.
Before he would find the transcription ready to go to the publisher, he would, to my great surprise, play it over and over and over again, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 times. I spend a lot of time here in this studio. And I think about how many musical transcriptions were written in this studio by Mr. Heifetz in the middle of the night. He used to tell me that what kept him perky and happy all through the night was just a glass of Coke and a cigarette. And that was it.
Heifetz was extraordinarily patriotic throughout his life. It was a tremendous turning point in his life to become an American citizen in 1925.